I think what we wanted to start with was just typically what are the different questions that we have seen organizations trying to answer as they are trying to address and navigate through the different challenges they have. And these questions are mostly related to their outreach, to the work they are doing in which thematic area, which geographic area, their program effectiveness, cost effectiveness. Basically, are their interventions really making a difference out there in the communities that they are serving? And these questions obviously have a very common theme. It's about how do we go about making an impact? So all of this hype around data and how to inform any program changes by making data-driven decisions, it all really boils down to your impact and the need to measure it effectively. I think I heard a lot of buzzword impact measurement coming up in the last session as well. So we will be touching a bit of that as well in this session. Over to you, Tripti.
Thanks, Shyama. So before we actually dive into the process of gathering data and applying it to inform decision-making, it's really important to answer the why. Why should you be measuring impact? I mean, I think of it with three main points, but I imagine, people have different reasons, but I think these are a good place to start and understand, what is the need and why is it actually important to be measuring impact. So the first and most important reason is to understand whether you're actually having an effect on the people you are serving. And then to figure out if that impact is actually net negative or positive. It's also critical to understand the customer and give them a say in your social work. I heard in the last session that listening is really important, and really listening to the people you're trying to serve is paramount to the work that you're doing. And finally, to share data with important stakeholders. This includes donors, funders, and other partners for various reasons, including accountability and reporting purposes.
Okay, thanks. I think we probably need to go a bit slowly. So I'll try to speak slowly. Let me know if that's not working. So now that we know we need to measure the impact, we will sort of relate it to data cycle, which is what you're seeing up there. Data cycle is basically the whole process of collecting data and using data. So we will dive into each of these different stages throughout this workshop, but just at a high level, what are these different stages? So planning is planning out what a program will do and how that will lead to the impact that you're making. Collection is just how we collect and capture the data that we want to measure. Management is around storing that data so you can easily access it and use it. Analysis or analyze is looking at the results as a whole, so summary of all of that data. And use at the end is finally how do you use insights from the data and improve your programs and further inform the strategy of your programs. So all of these stages, they all need to be super strong. Each stage is equally important to reach the ultimate goal of making your programs or your organization better. So look at this as a sort of a positive feedback loop that enables the use of data in an effective way. And of course, technology plays a very huge role in these different stages as well. But let's dive into each of these one by one, and we will start with plan stage. Tripti?
So the first step in the planning process is really defining your goals. The beneficiary promise that you've seen outlined on this slide can actually be used by companies to get to the core of who they are and what they want to achieve. So in this exercise, you really want to break your beneficiary promise down into component parts. For example, convenience or instant access. When we work with, or when 60 Decibels works with clients, we don't fill out this form every time, but we do encourage clients to narrow down in exactly what they want to know from their customers or end beneficiaries. So here's a prompt to really try and think about strategic points and insights that you want to learn. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's walk through this example together. I created one last night, so probably not the best use of my brain power, but so we are Shyama and Tripti's pizza place, and our mission is to serve the best pizza possible with ingredients from ethical sources. Our customer promise is to deliver, good pizza while limiting our carbon footprint. We serve all pizza lovers, and we want to understand what our customers think of our ethical approach to pizza making in order to decide whether we want to expand our business into new areas or we need to adjust our messaging. So in this example, you can see the kind of data you need to understand if you are endeavoring to deliver on your beneficiary promise, and also articulate the decisions that you could make if you had this data in hand. For example, if the last bit, which is we want to understand what our customers think of our particular approach. And that piece of information is actually very actionable, because that you're using that to decide whether you want to expand your business into new areas or try to change your messaging. Next slide, please, Shyama. Now that we have a gist of what we want to learn, let's try to break it down into little pieces to see exactly what we need to learn. So the beneficiary journey outlined here is the structure we use in most of our work to keep the customer at the center of the data process, but also to provide actions related to specific touch points in the beneficiary or customer's journey, which you can see on this slide. These are the things that our typical clients actually like to know about their beneficiaries. And based on these themes and questions, we use this information to develop indicators, which are essentially the fundamental things that you are trying to understand, keep track of, and measure over time. For example, something that we've seen repeatedly in our work is that most social enterprises generally want to know what are their customers or beneficiaries experiencing. In that, one of the indicators that we try to use to answer that information or gather that information is the Net Promoter Score. It's a widely used indicator. It's not specific to a particular industry, but it's been proven to be a very good gauge of satisfaction levels and loyalty of a firm's to a customer's loyalty to the firm, and good customer relationships. Other common questions that you see on the beneficiary journey include, who are my beneficiaries? What do they think of me? What is driving acquisition and retention? And how does my company compare to the competition? And each of those questions can have associated indicators aligned, like I showed with the Net Promoter Score and understanding experience of the customers. So you've set your goals, but now what do you do? In order to get started measuring impact, you first have to know what you want to measure. We alluded to that in the previous slide, but there are many logicals in the world that can actually help you set goals and create impact plans. Models used to help set goals, then develop indicators, and eventually form data collection plans. The reason these are so useful is because they actually force you to test the assumptions and linkages between what you're doing and what outcomes you want to see. Typically, logic models have 5 to 6 main components. The first one is inputs, which are resources that go into a project or program. In our previous pizza example, this included the cost of baking materials and staff costs. The second main component is activities. These are specific actions that will be taken, for example, marketing of the pizza place and the actual delivery of the pizzas. Outputs, these are tangible products or services produced as a result of the activities. For example, number of pizzas sold in a day or a year or over a period of time. Then come outcomes, which are super important. These are short-term results created by the program, usually for the direct beneficiary or customer. These are quite immediate changes that result from your actual business or program, and they can be observed in a fairly short period of time, under 1 to 3 years. And your short-term outcomes are the things that you will be able to measure immediately and regularly. And validating these will support your ability to actually meet long-term goals, which are being determined by your business plan or investors or other stakeholders involved. And I think what's really key here is that these are things that companies will be measuring regularly and have the ability to control and improve on. So outcomes are described as using terms like increase, decrease, enhance, and improve. And they really help you get a sense of like, are you achieving your mission, and are your values being met? after you've gone through the entire process of setting up your business and are finally delivering to your delivering products or services to your customers and beneficiaries. And the last bit is impact, which is the medium to long-term changes that results from accumulation of short-term outcomes. Long-term outcomes usually take a bit longer, 4 to 6 years, but and often are defined and enhanced based on the short-term outcomes that you are seeing repeatedly and are improving on or changing and working towards. Next slide, please. Okay, fabulous. So as we wrap up our planning stage, we're now ready to move into the data collection stage. So once we define our goals and determine our indicators, we really need to formulate these into questions that can help us gather that information in a clear, concise, and an unbiased manner. So I've outlined a long list of things to keep in mind, but essentially 2 main principles to follow when you are thinking of writing a good question. The first are technical points, which is essentially avoiding bias, refraining from asking non-leading questions, and avoiding judgment. And then the second bit, which is equally important, is just being respectful. So framing questions in a way that makes sure your respondent wants to answer them, keeping them fun, short, and sweet. And I think, obviously, it goes without saying, consent and making sure that people are, being asked for permission before questions are being answered, and they feel comfortable and safe in answering these questions. Beyond just selecting questions, survey design also needs to be taken into account, and the structure of your study and planning out when you will conduct your surveys is equally important. This includes, making sure your survey is really comprehensive, having a mixture of qualitative and quantitative questions, and then also determining what kind of study is best served for your particular purpose. Is that a one-off study or a baseline follow-up where you ask questions and track answers for those questions over a period of time, amongst other types of studies that are available. Next slide, please. So once you have your survey figured out and you have your questions locked in, there are, I think, a few key steps to always keep in mind when you are aiming to gather high quality data. The first is selecting an appropriate method. You could either be conducting online surveys, gathering data via text messages. You could be doing surveys on the phone and in person. The second important thing is really to inform your customers that you're coming so that the survey is not a shock to anyone. And after informing them, making sure still you're taking consent and respondents feel comfortable and safe answering the questions that you're posing to them. The third thing is to test your survey on a few random respondents to make sure your questions can yield good data, just like a mini pilot that helps you improve your questions if you're not getting the kind of answers you're expecting or gathering the data that really serves your purpose. And then you're ready to execute your survey. Obviously, the work doesn't stop here. Once you start gathering data, you have to consistently quality check your data to ensure the data is clean and makes sense. I'd like to spend, I know I alluded to this on the previous slide, but I'd really like to spend a little bit of time walking through the different methods of data collection, as this is quite important and a question that we see being asked very frequently. You can see each of the 5 methods outlined come at a different cost, and there are different best uses for each method. Also, each method requires different tactics with things like length, sensitivity, and timing. So to give you an example, remote surveys are less expensive and are easier to conduct. So these include online and phone surveys or even SMS messaging. Remote surveys also offer a higher degree of anonymity, meaning that respondents may be more comfortable to provide feedback honestly and openly. But in contrast to that, in-person surveys may be needed when asking especially sensitive questions where the researcher needs to ensure a safe space for the respondent and in order to also conduct focus groups to allow a little bit of discussion, on in-person surveys end up trumping the benefits of remote surveys. Just to underline something that has been even more important is in the times of coronavirus and the pandemic is that each type of methods, pros and cons, have actually become more evident, while remote surveys have really been how people are conducting data collection in the last several months. People are also realizing that there are voices that are going unheard because of the very nature and framework of how remote surveys are conducted. So while sometimes there is a need to pick one method over the other, being abundantly clear about what kind of information you may be missing is important so that you can account for that in your study. I'm going to hand it over to Shyama now to talk more about the next steps in the data cycle.
Thanks, Tripti. Cool. So we went through planning, we collected and captured data, and now the next stage in this data cycle is management. So once you have actually collected your data, you need to store it and you need to manage it. So when we talk about data management, really think of solutions that are easily accessible, they are flexible and are secure, and it essentially makes your data available when you need it. So the first point that I've mentioned over here is understanding your data type, which is in tech world, maybe we'll call it metadata, but what is it that you're collecting? Are you collecting names? Are you collecting emails, numbers? What is the kind of data that you're collecting? And then deciding an optimal system that helps you track that type of data, whether it is structured or unstructured. Unstructured data is sort of media files or videos, because I'm sure a lot of that form of data is also collected. So you need a system that can help you store all of that. And you need to store it somewhere where you can actually continuously update it and add information to it, which is, I think, probably similar to what Tripti had mentioned, where you need to keep it consistent. In order to keep it consistent, you need access to a system where you can constantly update it. The next two bullets are mostly about data hygiene. Cannot emphasize enough how important data hygiene is, but you need to keep your data clean and accurate. It does not matter what your database is. Maybe you're using an Excel sheet, which is fine. Maybe you're using a software, which is also fine. Whatever it is, you need to have good data practice. Otherwise, you'll end up getting in sticky situations like maybe you're reaching out to the same donor twice. Maybe you don't know who is interacting with which donor. This kind of information will be difficult to track. We usually implement, Vera is typically implementing Salesforce as a system for organizations. So one benefit of that is that these organizations can schedule regular reports to themselves, maybe on a weekly or a monthly basis, to keep a check on the data, or maybe they can create charts to view summary of the data. But that is one recommendation I would give, to maybe think of a tool that can automatically send you updates and can help you stay on the top of things. The next one, keep consistent, is equally important. Maybe a tip around that would be to have naming conventions. Use specific format for the names that you have. A very simple example is if you have, let's say, a donor from United States, we have seen organizations capture different records of that, where in one place they call it US, in another place it's written USA, in another place it's written United States. So that kind of inconsistency is really not going to help you easily read your data back. So when you are capturing your data, maybe just like have defined formats and keep it consistent in those formats. And of course, review it and update it as well. And then the last piece is about following best security practices. You would likely want a tool that keeps your data secure. And especially if you're working in a nonprofit, you're probably working with a lot of at-risk individuals. You're probably collecting a lot of sensitive data. So you need to secure your system. I've mentioned a point that calls out security could mean both technological and human, which means you probably need a technical system that helps, that is secure, that out of box has some high security standards. But of course, there's human elements as well, where people just need to, like, in practice, have good methods or good practices. Either way, you just have to be very intentional, and you have to intentionally take care that you have good secure practices when you're capturing and managing your data. So not going too much in detail about that, but that's more or less about management of data, which is essentially around how you store it. Once we are out of that cycle, now we are done with the third stage. We now have a centralized system where we are storing all of the data. The next step is analysis. Now, what exactly is analysis? I'm sure a lot of you are already doing this or are probably familiar with it. But if you're collecting data just for the sake of collecting it, then it's pretty much meaningless, right? You need to process it, you need to interpret it and turn it into something actionable. And that's what data analysis does, or analytics does that. It sort of helps you transform your data into knowledge. It helps make your data more valuable and essentially useful so that you can make decisions based on that data. Just to be clear, it does not replace your job of being the thinker. You are still the decision maker over here. You still have to do a lot of thinking and decide how to go about it. But what analytics will provide is it will give you insights so that you are better at that decision making job. So it will give you insights to ask the right questions, to tap into the right places so that you know where the gap is. And that way you know where to focus your energy. That's what data analytics does. There are many tools out there that can help you. Google Analytics is a very simple example. It is free as well. We have seen organizations use more robust tools just for analytics, like Power BI, Tableau, and so on. Again, at Vera, because we are mostly have expertise in Salesforce, we implement Salesforce for organizations. So I can probably show you how we have seen them use a Salesforce dashboard as an example. So if I go on to the next slide, this is just a simple example of what a Salesforce dashboard looks like. So we'll talk through maybe how this kind of a dashboard can be viewed to get some insights into the organization. So I can see over here, I can track my budgets, my planned and actual budget over different quarters. I can, if my intervention is related to helping farmers, and if I have the data structure in place, if I have entered data related to the outcomes and outputs that you had defined initially, you will be able to see or see a summary of this nature, where you can see how much income was saved, or maybe you can see your projects are spread across which geographic areas. Again, if you have indicators defined, this chart over here is giving a result summary of each of these indicators. So then you know which one's doing really well, which one maybe needs some improvement and things of that nature. So yeah, this is a lot around analytics and how we have, at least in our practice, seen organizations use a visualization chart to see a summary of their data. This very closely ties to the next stage of the cycle. So I'm gonna go on to the next stage because in my perspective, analysis and use are very closely related. So over here, what is use? Basically, it is about using that data to improve your programs and to inform your strategy. So you have stored your data, you have already run reports, you have visualizations on it. What do you do next? So now you capitalize on that data. You will use it to answer the questions that are most important to you, that are most important to your organization. And again, you will use it to track the performance of the outcomes that you had defined in the planning stage that Tripti had initially spoken about. So you have your short-term and long-term outcomes. Now you need to track the performance of that, or the effectiveness of those the programs on those outcomes. And this last bit, which is tell a story, which I think is definitely mine and Tripti's as well favorite piece, is make sure that your data is telling you a story. The analytics that the way you use the summary of your data, you're able to tell a story out of that. So don't just be mechanical, like I impacted 100 beneficiaries, I maybe planted 10 trees, which is great. I'm not saying that is not important data. That is very important data. But besides that, if your data is able to tell a story, you will be able to see the depth of your impact as well. If I have to take a simple example of the organization I worked at before I was at Vera. So I mentioned that I used to work at Yuva, which is working with girls in rural Jharkhand. If that Yuva program has 10 girls in the football and education program, they are not only impacting the lives of those 10 girls, they are also indirectly impacting 10 households. Because these girls are really improving the quality of their family members' lives, and they are also having an impact on that community or on that village in general. Because I've seen young girls who are now look up to these elder girls as role models, and they are like, we are not getting married at 16. We want to go to different places like these DDs that we are seeing. So that's just a very beautiful story that probably Yuva as an organization has, with all of the impact that they're making with the girls who are beneficiaries in this case in their different programs. So you can tell a beautiful story as well with the data that you have if you try to read it in that manner. I do want to spend a little time on just some examples that we were thinking, or examples that we have seen typically for organizations. I think the first one is sort of related to pandemic. So I think Tripti helped with this one, and feel free to elaborate if you want, Tripti, on what I'm saying. But for example, we do know that customers or a lot of people have lost jobs. A lot of people have maybe lost income that they receive. And let's say they have data, they read that data and they understand you as an organization have realized that a ton of people do not have jobs now. They have been hit really hard by the pandemic. You can maybe use that data to ask questions like, who are these people? Which regions are they mostly based in? What is the income profile of these people? In this instance, the question raised is, which customers are mostly facing the problem with the electricity connect? And an example decision that you can make out of it is, well, cool, let's launch a financial package program and let's assist this section of the community to help them go through this pandemic phase. Another example, the second one, is just based out of a project that we are recently working on. It's around tracking student attendance in schools. And we created a report that helps you see the lowest attendance. It also gives you a calendar view. So you can see disaggregated by sex. You can see what the absent trend looks like. And what that could help teachers eventually do is, if they end up noticing, let's say, some female students have a very regular pattern of absence every month. So there are specific weeks when they are definitely absent. That question could lead to finding answers like, okay, cool. So it looks like when they have their menstrual cycle, they tend to miss sessions a lot. So how do we go about it? There's one example decision that we have put out over there, which is maybe organizations can give out menstrual kits to these students because they cannot really access the resources required to stay healthy during that time. Or maybe there could be another decision that you as an organization had to make, where maybe you want to change the shape of your education program to accommodate the absences that you know will definitely happen, just given the health of these students. Just again, going back to Yuva, sorry, I keep going back to my organization, but we had another instance where during the harvesting season, the girls were mostly the hard workers of the family. They definitely had to miss school because they had to go to the fields and harvest and do the ropa season, as they call it in Jharkhand. So we used to mostly have 1 week off instead of maybe some other Saturdays or some other time off. There used to be a holiday season during the ropa, the 1 week where they had to do harvesting. So this is the kind of decision that organization could arrive at because they had data to show them the trend of absenteeism among students. The third example that I have out here is actually inspired by Akshay Patra. I was just very impressed by how they had reduced a huge amount of cost in delivering meals to the students in schools. They actually worked with IIT students, I believe, or IIM. I think my memory fits on that. But they actually, together with the students, did a study of how much fuel and time is being consumed. They did a study on what are the best traffic routes, what's the traffic data like in these regions. And with that study, with that data, They ended up concluding what is the best delivery route. They ended up reducing the delivery routes that can be used by these vehicles, and eventually reduced the cost of delivery by a huge amount. So these are just some examples of how potentially data can help ask the right questions, can help make decisions, and maybe potentially pivot the shape or the route that your program is going on, and make strategic changes at that level.